Welcome to Inside the Mavs, the return episode of Inside the Mavs. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host for 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Joined as always by my partner Grant Afseth, who writes for the Dallas Mavericks on MavericksSI.com. Grant, good to see you, man. Glad to have you back on the Inside the Mavericks podcast. How we doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Definitely glad to be able to talk with you about the Mavs with regular season games going on. And yeah, it'll be a very interesting thing to have throughout the rest of this 82-game season for sure.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been asking, hey, where's the podcast? Where's it been? What's going on? I had to keep it under wraps until I was able to obviously reveal that, being the new Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. So with that being said, the podcast is back. We'll be doing this podcast 3 times a week. You can download the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. You can also find it on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. You can also find it on Grant's YouTube channel as well. Make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube as well, as he does terrific work covering the Mavericks, traveling all over the country and all over the world, literally covering this team. So you can definitely make sure you subscribe to Grant's YouTube channel as well at Grant Afseth there. But let's talk some Mavericks basketball again. Download the podcast on iHeartRadio. We are the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Again, the Inside the Mavs podcast, the official podcast of 97.1 The Freak. You can tell it's been a while since I've been doing this. But again, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Let's talk some Mavericks basketball before I mess up anymore. As the Dallas Mavericks are off today before they take on the Milwaukee Bucks. Let's take a look back, though, Grant, at a team that's 9-3 on the season, got a really nice road win against the Washington Wizards, dropped 130 points in the win, and Dereck Lively was particularly good in the third quarter with 13 points, 6 of 6 from the field, 3 rebounds. Just your overall thoughts, though, on the Mavericks getting that road win, bouncing back after getting blown out in the second game of 2 games that was in New Orleans, on the second night of a back-to-back in Washington, being able to walk away with the win there.
Yeah, for sure. I thought, having that poor of a performance against the Pelicans, 24 hours prior was definitely a great bounce back. Luka had 6 turnovers in the first quarter alone, 8 on the night. And, he had one of those performances where, like, if you look at the bottom 5 probably of his NBA career, you'll probably see that one there, which is I think it was 5 for 16 from the floor or something like that as well. The Pelicans really disrupted things with Herb Jones getting back in the lineup. He wasn't there for that first matchup. And they switched up their strategy. That's why it's tough to see a team twice in a row. They had Herb Jones guard Dereck Lively and kind of switch and blow up the ball screening actions that worked really well in the first matchup. So that really disrupted them. And I thought it was interesting because they saw a similar approach early against the Wizards in the following game. They had Kyle Kuzma guarding Lively to handle the switching early on. And then, they really wanted to hunt Jordan Poole by getting Grant Williams and then at times Derrick Jones setting ball screens and getting involved in the stack pick and roll actions as well. And it was interesting because the Wizards, I felt like they just ultimately decided, well, we're getting picked apart doing all of this. Let's try just regular ball screen coverage. And that's when, in the third quarter, Dereck Lively really started to be the beneficiary of, Luka picking them apart with those high pick and roll sequences. So I thought overall it was very interesting to see them see a style of play, a more talented Pelicans defense for sure. And then, take what they learned, apply it against a less talented Wizards team and handle business without Kyrie Irving in the lineup for that second night of a back-to-back.
Yeah, you could tell that the Mavericks, in terms of their athleticism, wanted to get up and down the floor. We know that Washington likes to play with a lot of pace as well, although they're not very good defensively. The Mavericks were able to take advantage of that. And one of the big things I saw, definitely that was a difference from the game against the Pelicans in this first night of that back-to-back. They cut down on the turnover problem. The Mavericks were much cleaner in terms of protecting the basketball and ensuring that as they were getting up and down in transition, they were able to finish, but also conversely, not turning the ball over. You can win a lot of games when you're able to not only protect the basketball, but get up and down the floor in transition. And you saw that particularly with Dereck Lively's athleticism, a lot of rim running for him. Jason Kidd talking about that after the game, loving the fact that he was getting up and down the floor. And Grant, that's something we've talked about for this team so far this season. is the amount of pace at which this team is playing at. Right now, Mavericks 4th in pace in the league this year. What has been the difference based off of what you've been able to observe so far, covering this team all season long, on the road and at home, about what the pace has been looking like so far for this team? Because it's been much different than any time in the Luka Doncic era, really.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the past, what you've typically had is whether it was like the Houston Rockets or teams like that where they're undisciplined in transition, the Mavs would kind of speed things up and pick them apart. And then you would see them go back to being slow against, more, I guess you could say, like veteran or solidified teams. But this season, they rank 5th in pace, entering Saturday's game. It's actually picked up in the last, handful of games. That's kind of helped them increase their ranking as well. And I think a big part of that is, whether, it's Kyrie on a grab and go in transition and just pushing the pace, or, Luka making a throw ahead pass, or sometimes even pushing himself. That's really helped push the pace. But I think other times, as games kind of go on, especially after halftime, they've been more willing to have, whether it's like Tim Hardaway or Derrick Jones, kind of get into the possession as the initiator as well. And they've been quick in some of their like free-flowing sort of half-court actions as well, whether it's like a handoff or off-ball screening action. They've gotten into those quicker, so they're not having to play as much of the mismatch hunting game where it's late in the clock and Luka has to really break down like a ton of the defense throughout a whole game. He still does that quite a bit at times. And that's what you want like a elite player to do. But the whole goal is to kind of alleviate the burden when they can with picking their spots for Luka, since, last year he had to shoulder such a heavy load that, as the year went on, it kind of wore him out. And then he had that quad injury after the All-Star break. And, just all those sort of strategies are helpful for a team to push the pace. But individually, players like Tim Hardaway, who really thrive when they get up shots and are able to kind of have simple sequences, whether it's like, having a favorable matchup, who's stopping the ball and just being able to get to the rim, or just coming off of, in the half court, those off-ball screens to get into a clean shot. Those things have helped him. And he, against the Wizards, we saw that he and Luka both had over 20 points in that first half. And, that really helped set the tone on the night that, Kyrie Irving wasn't playing. So, overall, I feel like that kind of gets more out of the group. And even Dereck Lively really helps them in that respect as well, because he'll put in work as a rim protector on one end, run the floor hard, and he makes quick passing reads. I think that's something that's very underrated about his skill set. There was even a play where Luka was able to just basically get it back, attack off the catch, and the defense wasn't set, and it was just an easy play for him. And when you can create opportunities like that, where it's just simple read and react, the defense isn't set, and your superstar doesn't have to work as hard, even on one possession, those things really add up over the course of a game.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've been excited about with Dereck Lively is obviously there's a learning curve for him, continuing to grow within the role as a 19-year-old, trying to be an anchor for a defense, learning how to play without fouling. But some of the things offensively that have been very interesting, we knew that the rim running and some of the finishes around the rim were going to be pretty good for him to start off with. But some of the passing that he's been able to do out of the short roll, finding men in the corner, doing some different things from an IQ standpoint, that even for a guy that's 19 years old, still trying to learn the NBA game, those are some pleasant surprises that I think should give Mavericks fans a lot of confidence that as he continues to grow in his role, he will continue to put those things into more consistent spots, night in and night out. But that's one of the things I've noticed and loved about him, is that there's something different each time you see him get on the floor that he's incorporating, whether it be just simply positioning himself better in terms of on the defensive end, learning how to be able to defend without fouling, but more importantly on the offensive end, being able to have opportunities to make passes, be somewhat of a mini playmaker out of the post or in the middle of the lane by recognizing some of those short roll passes or some guys that are open in the corners to be able to knock down threes, which the Mavericks are going to be really good at this year, shooting the basketball wise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's been also some development with his finishing touch as well. Something that, when you and I were at some of their practices before they went off to Summer League in Vegas, they were really working with him, especially Tyson Chandler, on his touch, whether it was like on those quick hooks or even just getting in a little bit of the post. And, those things were things he entered the NBA needing to improve. And he's already shown improvement, which is fascinating because, a 19-year-old who seems to really pick things up pretty quickly. Like, we're not even like 21 games or 20, 25, 30 games into the season, and there's things that you can actively say, like, he responded after this game of foul trouble. He picked up this particular like lesson and he's applying it. Like, that's very impressive for any rookie, but a 19-year-old that some considered, especially like the people that we talk to as well, as being like a raw sort of player entering the NBA, and all the intricacies or nuances on both ends of the floor that they really focused on in Las Vegas. He's really like applied that during that period with the months that he spent at the Mavs facility, and then throughout training camp and now. And it hasn't even been an easy set of circumstances for him by any stretch. Like, they had to go overseas, not have that traditional sort of like at home feel for your training camp where it's like there's no travel involved like that. He had to face, like, if you look now, the Timberwolves are like the best defense in the NBA, and he had to face both of those star big men over there, and Naz Reid as well. And, it's been a very odd run as well early on. There hasn't been a lot of practice time in the actual season for him, with them being like away, home, away, home, away, home early on. And then they have only had one stretch of consecutive home games so far. And I think that's going to hold true through the end of November, since their first sort of home back-to-back is in December technically. So that's pretty fascinating to see him, regardless of the situation, whether it's home or away, or on the run, if you will, really picking things up, applying things from film sessions, and being receptive from his veteran teammates and the coaching staff. And it's not even December yet, and we're talking about quite a few things that have improved.
Yeah, and that's been impressive for him to be able to show those growth moments, the IQ continuing to develop as far as his game is concerned. I think for Mavericks fans, and one thing that we'll be watching, at least for me in particular, is how sustainable this is going to be for the rest of the season, because as much growth and as much as we've seen him continue to improve even through the first 12 games of the season, it's very difficult to ask a 19-year-old to come in to be a defensive anchor and then continue to not only grow on that end, but also developing the chemistry that we've seen with him with Luka so far, particularly in the Washington game. He's looking pretty good so far. I just hope for him that, because every rookie hits that proverbial rookie wall where at some point he's going to struggle a little bit, how he responds and be able to overcome that is something I'm looking forward to watching him do. But so far, the results for the most part have been good. Yes, he's going to remain in foul trouble at times. That's any rookie, especially playing in the post and learning how to defend some of the bigs in this league who are extremely athletic. He'll get better from that. But as long as he continues to show that improvement, Lively's got a real bright future. And so far through 12 games, you've seen several glimpses of that in different areas that I think Mavericks fans should have a lot of confidence in and be able to be excited about as far as his game is concerned there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's some things too where he shows unique quality, or not necessarily unique, because there's some other players in the league that are able to do it, but just rare qualities, like being 7'1" with the 7'7" wingspan. That's something that we talked about during the summer. Like, it's just crazy that the level of contesting he can do when he's playing up on ball screen coverage. Not many bigs have those tools to be able to do that. But what really separates him from a lot of other players is that he has the foot speed, the agility, and the recognition now that he's really picking up the defensive responsibilities within the Mavericks scheme, to be able to handle like the switching, get comfortable with the matchups he's facing, whether it's out on the perimeter, and then not getting frustrated with tough results. Like, it's a little different than the AAC or ACC, I should say, the ACC, where, like Jordan Poole has you on a switch or Kyle Kuzma or whatever player you want to say, and you're just getting a hand up and they're shooting it over the top and knocking it down. Like, he's like, I saw him make a little bit of a gesture like, okay, all right. like after that one where he was out on the island and just had his arms like stretched out, contesting tightly, and just being able to stay level-headed and not get frustrated with results as you get used to the NBA in that regard is definitely something that shows a lot of maturity. But I think just overall the qualities that he has is a rare combination. And like what we said in the summer early on in this whole process is that ideally you would like to have him be able to play up in ball screen coverage, blitz the ball handler, recover, and be very versatile, handle the switching, the veer switching in particular, that really runs the clock out in the half court when, like a guard's trying to get into the gap and then they decide, all right, well, they veer switched. I got to just pull this thing out and then try to attack Lively. Well, if he handles that switch late in the clock, that's a win for the defense, even if it's a make on a tough shot. And those are the types of intangibles they haven't had in a big man in a very long time. And, he has a lot of those, checks a lot of those boxes. And as he continues to get comfortable, both personnel-wise with matchups and just the scheme, I think you're going to see him really elevate his impact even more than he's already shown, particularly against those tougher matchups. Because against the Wizards, it really popped his impact, deterring short range and finishes when guys got downhill against him. But that's likely going to be more of the case when they play those tougher teams as he continues to get acclimated. And then that's where you have the making of a very strong foundation for a defense that helps you have that floor where you should handle business on a nightly basis against bad teams. Obviously any team will have some letdowns. Even the Denver Nuggets lost to Houston not long ago, on Sunday. But regardless, having that consistent floor helps you level up instead of being that 38-44 team if there's injuries to a superstar player for a stretch and things like that. So overall, there's a lot to like about what that means in the big picture as he continues to go forward.
And as you look at this team, defensively, there will be a lot of questions that we continue to learn about and answer as the season goes on, because one of the conversations that we're having around this team is we know that they're going to score. In fact, going through some of the numbers, the team right now is second in offensive rating. We talked about being a top 5 team in terms of pace right now. They're third in turnover percentage, fifth in the NBA in three-pointers attempted, while the shot clock has more than 18 seconds left, which is crazy because they're shooting nearly 49% on those type of shots where they're able to get those three-pointers up pretty quickly, which is a wild percentage when you think about getting a three-point shot up that early and hitting it at a nearly 50% rate. That's a spectacular number and just shows you some of the variety in terms of their ability to get up and down in transition while knocking down shots, and particularly Luka Doncic, who's shooting more catch-and-shoot three-pointers than he has had at any point since his rookie season, and he's been able to knock those down at a fairly decent rate this year. Are you surprised that they've been able to sustain some of this pace so far, and is it sustainable throughout the rest of the season given this change that they're playing with right now?
I think I will say I am a little bit surprised that they have been able to sustain it, mostly because Kyrie has been a little bit in and out of the lineup in the last little bit. Not to make it sound like he's missed half the games, but, that's 3 total games, and he's kind of the main proponent of pushing the pace with how quickly he gets up the floor and kind of being that reminding presence. With how he was vocal last year about the importance of pushing the pace. But I do think, in general, when you see those signs, as you pointed out, the catch and shoot willingness and aggression from Luka when things within the flow kind of find him instead of kind of hesitating on the catch and kind of slowing up the possession, he's been more aggressive, letting it fly. And they put him in some actions as well, too, where he's, instead of kind of using it just to get a switch to ISO, he's been able to kind of raise into the shot and be aggressive in that regard. And I actually asked him about it not too long ago. And he actually mentioned that, in the post-game press conference, he mentioned that, since that's an easier shot, that's, instead of having to take all those step backs, that's something that, he likes about that. And that's just honestly a lot of his observations as a great player that relate to him, is that whether I ask him about being a certain action or not having to basically create so much in difficult situations with high pick and rolls and ISOs, it's all about making his stamina more lasting, it's easier, he says, he likes to say less tired. So I think having those sort of sequences add up throughout a whole season where he's in a game and he's having easier shots come his way that are more created within the flow instead of having to break down so many unassisted opportunities. Definitely should make it easier for him. And, with his willingness to do that is definitely a key proponent of it. He worked on his catch and shoot jumper. He mentioned that, a couple weeks ago, that was something that he focused on. And, I think he kind of sounded like he thought people were doubting him, that he was actually going to take those shots more. When he answered my question, he said, I know, not verbatim, but he basically said, I know some people talk about my catch and shoot. And then, he said, it's an easier shot, so I'm going to, take those more. So overall, when you have the buy-in from one of your superstars, who is one of the highest usage players in the NBA, if not the most. I haven't checked the stats, but definitely always one of those annual like leaderboard type usage rate guys. That's a big influence on the overall team as a whole. And just having personnel like whether it's Tim Hardaway Jr. or some of the other players like Derrick Jones who benefit from playing faster, I think it all just kind of creates a helpful identity or ecosystem that you can build on throughout the full season. But having Kyrie healthy and in a rhythm, I think that will definitely be interesting to monitor because even when Luka's been off the floor, some of those situations, I don't think he's really dominated the ball as much as he necessarily had like last season, like after that trade, because I don't think he's fully gotten into that rhythm yet. He mentioned that he took 30 or 40 days. I don't remember the exact number off in an uncharacteristic sort of off-season approach. Normally he's one of those guys that really puts in a ton of time in the gym. And if anything, he may overdo it at times because he's that kind of like a mentality. Like I guess you could say from the Kobe Bryant school of, Mamba mentality in a sense. So him taking that time off, I think has been different for him to get used to kind of getting back into that rhythm. And so that's something I'm really interested in seeing is how effective, when Kyrie's in that rhythm and fully like in the lineup on a like very consistent basis after dealing with his foot sprain, is how impactful he can be to continue to push the pace, especially in those lineups where he's really gotten aggressive when Luka's off the floor, had some stretches where he's scored like 7 straight points, 8 straight points himself. Those could become even more potent where, that Minnesota Timberwolves game last year, I think it was his home debut with the Mavs. He scored like 20 plus in the fourth quarter, just being in a rhythm and just taking full advantage of opportunities on like grab and goes and just pushing the pace. So overall, I think there's still untapped potential for a team who has their second best player not in a rhythm and is already like the third best half court offense from efficiency standpoint, behind only the Pacers and the Celtics. So overall, a lot of that stuff will be fascinating to monitor. As we look into the Bucks game, where Kyrie is expected to be able to play with him participating in practice in Washington D.C. at Georgetown on Friday.
It's interesting because the Mavericks you talked about with the pace with Kyrie and being able to take advantage of some opportunities during this in that second unit. Mavericks so far this season already have 9 games with at least 100 offensive possessions. They only had 9 such games all of last year. So that just gives you an idea of what kind of pace this team is playing with so far through 12 games, being able to sustain quite a bit of it. And from Kyrie's standpoint, you mentioned the Milwaukee game. Milwaukee right now, not a great defensive team, obviously moving on from Drew Holiday. This is a team that's in the high 20s, which is not good in terms of defensive rating right now. I believe they're around 24, 25 in terms of defensive rating in the league right now. So they're struggling on that end of the floor. So you're looking at a Mavs team that can take advantage of some of those opportunities, and particularly with the athleticism that they're playing with right now. One of the biggest surprises that we have seen so far this year has been the play of a guy like Derrick Jones Jr., who was I won't call it a throwaway signing, at the end of the free agency period, but it felt like it wasn't going to be necessarily a huge impact move. But he's been terrific. He's already had 2 20-point games so far this year. He had 2 in total through his first 8 seasons in the league. And I'm just surprised at the level of shooting that he's been able to provide to them, because I'm not going to lie to you, Grant, and I still feel this way, honestly. I still feel like Josh Green gives you a better upside in terms of defensive effort when it comes to what he does on both ends of the floor as he's continuing to get better as a three-point shooter. But you got to give Jason Kidd a lot of credit for sticking with Derrick Jones Jr. and, more importantly, Jones Jr. for rewarding that confidence with his play so far this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think definitely it all starts with shooting. When you're a team that's led by Luka, who's going to generate a lot of wide open looks, and teams are going to dare the weakest shooter to shoot. Like we've seen that in the last couple of games, whether it's like, as we mentioned, like with Herb Jones being the one guarding Lively, that means Valanciunas is guarding Derrick Jones, and he's sagging off of him, pre-rotating as an early low man in the paint, which essentially is like, Derrick Jones, make us pay, and we'll think twice about doing this approach. And as long as
if Derrick Jones is beating you from 3, good for him. Good for him.
Yeah, exactly. That's
we'll let you have
mindset, because there's so much firepower. Like if Kyrie's in the lineup, you have Luka, Kyrie, and then you have like highly efficient shooter on the other side with Grant Williams, and then you have Like, are we going to give up finishing for one of the most efficient finishers in the league, Dereck Lively? Like, yeah, we'll live with picking that poison. And I think, with the Wizards game, it was fascinating because there's just so many ways that points can stack up if you really embrace that role and you knock down the open shots. Early on, I think he had 2 first quarter threes. Overall, he was 2 for 5, I believe, if I remember correctly, against Washington. But he did other things, like, being a re-driving threat is something that is a different dimension that both Grant Williams and Derrick Jones provide this year. Like, something that we talked about with the roster before, like, all the offseason moves kind of got made, which is how one-dimensional some of those wing players like Reggie Bullock were on the team last year, where if Luka, attacked downhill, sprayed it out, and they got the ball moving, sometimes players, if they didn't take the shot on the catch, they would just hold the ball, and it would kind of, you don't want Reggie Bullock attacking downhill with if you look at the statistics of his efficiency or inefficiency, I should say, like they were like with Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock, they were among like the lowest in the league in terms of like consistent starter minutes guys, with 20 plus minutes in terms of like the volume of scoring on like drives or pull-up shooting. So it's just like lack of dynamic element to their game. But having someone who's athletic like Derrick Jones to be able to redrive when you get the ball popping on that initial spray out pass, that adds a different dimension. And he's been effective, like whether he's finishing at the rim or playing through contact to get to the free throw line or for an and one. He had one of those sequences against Washington that really stood out. And then, just naturally, since he's been a guy that's played the 5 spot as well in small ball lineups, he's kind of got a knack for being a well-timed cutter as well. You don't get that from many wings. And so if he's hitting the outside shot, he can redrive, he can cut, he can push and transition. And also in some of those second side action situations this season, you've seen like where Kyrie kind of gets into a quick ball screen into a pocket pass or a handoff with him for that pocket pass as well on the side of the floor. He's very athletic to where he can be a threat on that role. And, Kyrie's going to draw 2. Luka's going to draw 2. And if you don't recover quickly enough or have the back end, weak side of your defense rotating, Derrick Jones is going to make you pay as that roller. So there's just a lot of little ways points can stack up if he like embraces the role as he has. And definitely seeing how consistent he can be from 3 for the rest of the season will be something to keep an eye on. He's definitely, backed up Jason Kidd's confidence so far, like in that starting role. And, something interesting about Derrick Jones' shooting is I actually talked to him in preseason before one of those games. I think it was before the Detroit game. And he mentioned, like, I just asked him, like, what kind of went into your career year, 34%, like last year, like anything mechanically you adjusted or anything that helped you kind of reinforce habits to really like sustain those results. He just kept it simple. He was just like, no, I've always been a good shooter. I have confidence in my shooting, and I look forward to basically, shooting with the Mavs. So
more opportunities to shoot the basketball.
Yeah. So it was like, all right, I can respect it. You're making the most of it, for sure. So, I guess he's always been confident in his shooting. He has a volume of opportunities to let it fly, and he's getting comfortable in that. And yeah, just interesting to see if it sustains throughout the full season, but so far so good.
Yeah, and you give him a lot of credit for taking advantage of those opportunities. As you mentioned, when you're playing in an offense with Luka and Kyrie, you're going to get a lot of wide open looks. And if teams are going to dare you to shoot the basketball and you make them pay, whether it be Grant Williams, who we know is a good three-point shooter, Derrick Jones Jr., who's shot the ball well so far, and even for a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., because I'd be remiss if we don't talk about him because he's been playing at a 6th man of the year type of rate, which is very funny because my man didn't even have an idea that he was going to be a 6th man to start the year going into this NBA season. And so far, averaging over 18 points per game, had 31 against the Washington Wizards. Looks like he's going to be okay to play when they play Milwaukee on Saturday after having got ran into in the right knee by Kyle Kuzma, who fell down and hit him in the knee. But looks like he's going to be okay to play. For Tim Hardaway Jr., I'm happy for him because I'm not going to lie to you. I was one of the ones. There's a lot of folks like myself who felt like, hey, man, you got a lot of guards on this team between Tim Hardaway, Jaden Hardy. You brought in Seth Curry. You brought in Dante Exum. Where is the room and why is Tim Hardaway still on this team? But he has been proving why his worth is still where it needs to be. And for a guy who's on a descending contract, I don't know if he remains here once the trade deadline comes around But if he does, and he continues to play the way that he has so far, he's been spectacular for this team, particularly with the instant offense that he's brought off the bench so far for them this year.
Yeah, it's been pretty fascinating to watch because I think even back at Media Day, he made a comment where he didn't even know he was going to be on the team necessarily. Like
That's
he kind of,
right.
like with all the trade rumors that are kind of flowing around, and that, as you said, there was a lot of shooting on the team. With Jaden Hardy entering his second year, with Seth Curry, Dante Exum, all those types of guys, it was kind of hard to project where the minutes were going to come from or how roles were going to be distributed. But definitely, he's made the most of his opportunities. And I think, something I did ask him about on Media Day that I think has been interesting to kind of track is just the impact of having that fully healthy offseason, like where he was able to work on his game and not have to focus on like finding himself physically like he did the previous summer. And, I think that's just made him more, like, I guess you could say electric or, dynamic when he's attacking the rim, whether it's in transition or if he's just getting downhill, like turning the corner and some of those half-court actions. I think those add up to make him a more effective and versatile player, in addition to that typical aggressive, like spot-up shooting that you see where he's letting it fly in some situations where other players may be reluctant to shoot it. And he's been converting at a very high clip. And I think, something with him too, he's actually got an intriguing like value to the team beyond just like the things that you see in the box score. Well, I guess you don't see charges necessarily in the box score, but he definitely is taking a lot of charges as he always tends to do. But I think another area that you see from him is he's been aggressive on the boards. You see that in the box score with him grabbing boards in some of these games at a high rate, with the team coming off that 30th, total rebounding percentage season last year. But the thing you don't see in the box score that I think he provides or enhances the offense is that, he's been used as a screener in some of those half-court actions, whether it's like double drag screens or things like that. And the defense does not want to switch off of him like very often. And so if you have that first player setting the screen where they're not going to want to switch off of him, and then you have that rim rolling threat, that really opens things up when teams are kind of trying to want to load up on Luka at the point of attack. And there's been some games where that's really opened things up. And I asked him about that, and he said, you're trying to get all my secrets, huh? Like he didn't want to tell me too much about those like specific sets or anything. But definitely about, like he said, it's about knowing your personnel. That's what I can tell you. And so, knowing your personnel would be about switching. So, him being a deterring option for the defense to switch off of, because they don't want him to flare out or just get a quick look. That shows that he's got that shooting gravity that a lot of like top level offenses really want from at least one of their sharp shooting threats, to be able to like add those extra layers to their half court offense to really continue to open things up for their superstar and pick apart the defense's weak points. And so, that's actually been a situation where like the defense has put their weakest defender are on like Jordan Poole, like for example, last night, whether it was Grant Williams coming up to set the different screens, like the stack pick and roll back screen to force Jordan Poole in the action, or a regular ball screen. Sometimes Derrick Jones had Jordan Poole on him. Having like that shooting threat who can continue to be like a spacer where they're not putting the weakest defender at times to deter basically him from being involved in the action. That just shows you the respect level that the opposing team has, for his skill set, and even playing faster. That's something that we haven't even really I haven't gotten into when describing his impact. Like he's had some grab and go situations, which ties into that impact on the boards where, sometimes as a volume shooter, there'll be times where, it's a very make or miss reaction. Sometimes people will be like, why did you shoot that? If it's a miss.
Exactly.
So sometimes it's not all great. Like it could be boom or bust. But when he is feeling it and he's knocking those types of shots down, when you have a team with Luka Doncic, when Kyrie's available, all that stuff, and a guy like Tim Hardaway is pulling up and knocking down those shots, you're just like, time out. Like what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
To us? So that's definitely a thing that kind of ties into last year as well. Like his shooting was a swing factor for the team in a lot of situations where when he was hot, sometimes they just overpowered some of the teams. But, that's why overall in the greater context, having different things that raise the floor, or attributes, I should say, that raise the floor of the team, like whether it's like Dereck Lively's rim protection or play finishing, definitely kind of makes us an interesting roster overall, with Tim being an interesting part of it, because as you said, the contract situation, the descending contract, he's making a big impact in that bench role. And so, like, what kind of like market value, if you will teams have now compared to where they thought about him maybe weeks or months ago, whenever the season hadn't even started yet. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And I think overall with the team, not to get too much into it, but like some of their lineup combos, when they get deeper into the game, they have some very small perimeter groups. So just seeing in general how they handle perimeter size, whether they kind of go with more minutes for Omax Prosper at some point, or they do try to make I guess you could say some sort of change where they add someone who's closer to 6'8" or anything like that, could be interesting to kind of keep an eye on overall if you're thinking about potential improvement areas. And Tim being 6'5", Josh Green's not. He's definitely considerably shorter than that 6'8" sort of level as well. So overall, just thinking about what would that look like if you were to make that sort of in-season move or anything of that nature, or just in the future, is definitely something interesting to think about. But definitely right now, he's playing his way into a very interesting situation where he probably is the front runner for Sixth Man of the Year. If you really look at like the off the bench stats, he's averaging like almost 19 a game at this point. And he's been one of the high volume 3-point shooters in the NBA, knocking down at a high clip. It's been very impressive to watch him kind of make that impact, stay consistent, and do other things as well so far this season.
And credit to Tim, because he's always been a professional, whether he was a starter or coming off the bench. He has always prided himself on staying ready, and you're seeing that come to fruition in a big way off the bench so far this year. And some of the things that have been seen from him, particularly in the Washington game, hitting jump shots off the dribble in the secondary break, being able to feel comfortable taking the ball off the dribble a little bit and be able to knock down shots from, 18, 19 feet off the dribble as well. As I mentioned, post break a little bit. Those are some of the things that add interesting wrinkles, because now just another element of this offense that you've got to make decisions on, whether it's Luka, whether it's Kyrie, Tim Hardaway coming downhill, be able to knock down jump shots as well. There's a lot of variety to this offense that's allowed them to be, the second most efficient offense in the league. And I think as we start to get ready to close and then start turning our attention toward, Milwaukee, is the idea that, look, this team will continue to score. They're not going to have a problem scoring with the variety of offense, whether it be from Luka, Kyrie, Tim Hardaway Jr. continuing to play well off the bench, Derrick Jones Jr. knocking down shots from the outside, Grant Williams, who got out to a really hot shooting start and knocking down a bunch of threes, and we know that's something he's capable of. The question will be, defensively, can this team be average? Can they find a way to somehow be somewhat – I'm just asking them to be somewhat mediocre. I don't need you to be bad. I don't need you to be horrendous. Just be somewhat mediocre on defense, because if you're going to play that way with the amount of pace that they're playing with, utilizing all the athleticism, you've got to find a way to get stops, because the margin for error for them is very, very thin. And you saw it the other night against the Pelicans. When they're turning the ball over, and coupled with not being able to play well on the defensive end, is going to end up in a lot of disastrous, 30, 40-point quarters. You're not going to win a lot of ball games doing that. If this can be an average defense, which may be unrealistic given some of the personnel, that they're dealing with, if they can, I don't see why this team can't win 45 to 50 games given all the offensive firepower that this team has.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely what they're going to have to lean on is kind of similar to what Utah had with Rudy Gobert, is the development of Dereck Lively, kind of elevating things. And that's a lot of responsibility to have on a 19-year-old.
And that's scary to ask a 19-year-old to be and have that level of responsibility while you bring your defense along in that way, I feel like.
For sure, because I think if you think about the starting lineup, you can feel good about like Derrick Jones, Grant Williams on the 3 and 4 spot, and then Lively at the 5, and then whatever you get from Luka defensively, you got to live with. And then Kyrie, he's a smaller guard in terms of frame, like he's very thin, so sometimes you just have to live with some of the things that teams will do to take advantage of that. But overall, it's like, I think definitely like when you get deeper into the games, there's been situations where they're just so small. And if Lively has a situation where he's out for whatever reason, like some sort of short-term injury or anything, that becomes a real challenge where you're trying to find combinations throughout a game where you can really get stops on a consistent basis. And then you already have a situation where Maxi Kleba, he's sidelined, and he entered the season kind of not playing to his typical standard that you would expect with his defensive versatility, but not having him available. Now they have to rely on a little bit more of another rookie, Omax Prosper, to kind of have those spot minutes as well. And then, they're kind of limited on the wing options. So you really need to see like a Josh Green find a way to take that like greater defensive responsibility or presence that he mentioned. Like in even way back in the FIBA World Cup, he mentioned he wanted to do that with the Mavs when I kind of talked to him about that. And he hasn't quite, I don't think, done that yet because there's been still situations, whether it's like positioning off ball or fouling or things like that he's still continuing to need to improve. That will need to come to fruition, if you will, because he's got the tools physically aside from the ideal height. Like he's a very he's a bigger framed perimeter player. He can really move in the half court. And he should be able to run around with those quicker guards that, whether it's like Reggie Bullock used to do in that role, where he's kind of taking those quicker options, whether it's like a Steph Curry or players like that. Like he should be able to handle those. And then, they have the size with, Derrick Jones or Grant Williams to handle other options that are bigger. Luka can handle some of those bigger players as well. So that's probably ideally where you would want that growth to come from, where Green just gets consistent and comfortable playing alongside Luka, Kyrie, and then develops defensively. But so far, I don't think that's come to fruition yet, obviously because he's still coming off the bench in that role as well. But overall, beyond that, I don't think there's too many spots where you could say there's like a great upside with what they have. So I think kind of keeping an eye on what potential changes could come with the wing spot will be interesting to see. But you do have to live with some of those defensive like size limitations for now when you have someone like Tim Hardaway kind of stepping into those lineups where he's really providing that offensive spark. So there are nights when the shots aren't falling or there's turnovers, as you said, at a high level or a high volume. You're going to have situations where there's letdowns, where there's like a really tough, like 44-point quarter like they had. I think they gave up against the Pelicans in the third quarter of that second matchup. So, it's definitely it's kind of like the Western Conference Finals run as well, too, like the Mavs had. It was like very like live or die by the three. And if there's like turnovers and things like that, you could have either a blowout one day in your favor or like one game later, 2 days later, you have a blowout going the other way. So definitely having that identity where you don't have to be so volatile is definitely going to be something to monitor. And I think, Lively's development's key to that, but then also finding long-term resolutions with the wing spot, whether that's through the development of current options or just seeing what's out there for sure.
Mavericks get back on the floor on Saturday night when they take on Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis and the Bucks taking place on on Friday when they take on Charlotte as the NBA in-season tournament continues. Giannis is going to play in that game on Friday, and it looks like he's back healthy as he's been dealing with a little bit of a calf injury as the Mavericks visit Milwaukee as they continue their road trip after winning on Wednesday against the Washington Wizards, dropping 130 points in that game. A lot of fun offensively, still a little bit left to be desired defensively, but at the same time, Mavericks are rolling right now at 9-3, playing some really good offensive basketball. We'll see if this defense comes along. Grant, tell the folks so they can find you and the work that you're doing and all the work that they can catch what you got going on these days.
Yeah, for sure. You can read my Mavericks coverage at dallasbasketball.com. That's the easiest way to find that stuff. I'm on X or Twitter, whatever you like to call it, just my full name, Grant Afseth. And then on YouTube as well with the same username, posting the press conferences, game highlights, and then, some film breakdowns as well. So you can catch all that stuff for sure throughout the season.
Yeah, Grant is traveling all over the country with this team, and he is on the road right now as the Mavericks get ready to take on Milwaukee on Saturday. And you'll find all of his terrific coverage, again, finding him on Twitter at Grant Afseth. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Kevin Gray Sports. Again, Mavericks pre- and post-game host for 97.1 The Freak, the official home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. Pre-game begins at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday with tip-off at 7 p.m. in Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee as the Mavericks take on Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks. You can find me again on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can also check out this video on YouTube, on my YouTube page at Kevin Gray Sports as well. And you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcast. Again, Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. We are back and better than ever. We're going to have a lot of the guests that you love to have, a lot of the analysis and coverage that you've grown to love and see from us here on Inside the Mavs. So we are back again every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A new episode will drop. So we'll do this 3 times a week. And if anything pops up emergency-wise, we'll definitely have those podcasts as well. But look for us consistently Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 times a week. Again, on iHeartRadio, download that app as well. You can listen to Inside the Mavs anytime, or again, wherever you get your podcast for free at Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube to watch the video as well. That'll do it for us here on this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, really appreciate you joining us. However, and wherever you may be listening to us, download and subscribe to the podcast Inside the Mavs, wherever you get your podcast for free. Find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth and find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. For Grant, my name is Kevin Gray. Appreciate you joining us on Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you on Monday to recap the weekend of Mavericks basketball here on Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you later.